you did it, so to speak. You didn't wait around for approval or anything else, because as far as I understand it, then you did your work regardless if you already had a contract for it to be published, so to speak. You did it first and then it was published, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, but very often I've written a lot of books that had not been contracted. I wrote them simply because I realized this was an interesting problem that I had to write about.
Yeah.
So I think there's a particular kind of focused concentration that means that once that you've achieved it, you have this sort of feeling that, of course, life has a meaning, and of course, once you've seen this meaning, it's not tremendously difficult to keep pursuing the meaning.
Yeah, that's right. And how do you see, if we talk about the robot concept again? And I know that you come from a positive outlook, and I do too. I would agree with you, and I would even agree with what you said earlier in the program, that there's forces, if you will, outside of humanity, that we are being aided, and our experience at large is in one form or another kind of being overseen or even guided in some instances. But I also see in some cases that the robot mentality is very prominent today, and I see that is slowly taking over, if you will, and something will have to happen for this to break, for people to awake on mass.
It's always the robot is one of the best things that ever happened to human beings. We wouldn't have achieved our present level if it hadn't been for the robot.
Right.
The reason that human beings are the most efficient animals on the surface of the earth is that we have a more efficient robot than any other animal. So don't knock the robot. The robot's of immense importance. The robot is, in a way, the reason that we've achieved this present level of evolution. Once we've really begun to understand our interaction with the robot, then it gets interesting. And this, of course, is what Gurdjieff spent all his life doing. He was interested. You see, when he talked about sleep, what he meant was that the robot, the fact that man is mechanical.
Do you think that that's in a more literal sense, even maybe? If we look at this from the point of view of if we indeed have a creator out there, it can be argued that we've been put together. We're kind of a biological robot, if you will, in that sense, and we've also been the purpose might be for this robot is also to obviously inhabit a spirit, or within it hold a soul, if you will. Would you agree with that, Colin?
Well, I have a feeling that many things are intended. In other words, there's already a force there pushing us in a particular direction. Our problem is to understand the force, to try to understand it instinctively. Instinctively. We're sort of rather like ships who are driven by winds with sails. And our main problem is, to keep before the wind.
Yeah.
And this I feel very, very strongly. The thing that makes me aware of this is when peculiar synchronicities occur, sometimes absurd synchronicities that seem so absurd, you think, this is hardly real. When they do, it tells you, that really there is a kind of meaning behind things which is normally hidden. I mean, for example, years ago, I got very interested in a cult called the Cult of Melchizedek, who's one of the obscure biblical prophets. And I began trying to learn everything I could about the Cult of Melchizedek. And I also learned that another friend of mine, Jacques Vallée, who was interested in UFOs, also got very interested in this Cult of Melchizedek. Well, Jacques said that when he was in Los Angeles, he took a taxi somewhere, and he asked his taxi driver, who was a lady, if he could have a receipt. His taxi driver wrote him a receipt labelled M. Melchizedek.
Okay.
So he thought, my God, incredible. He thought, there must be more Melchizedeks around than I thought. So looked in the Los Angeles phone directory, which, as you know, is sort of about 10 feet high. There was one Melchizedek, his taxi driver.
No.
Now, when Jacques had told me this story, I happened to be writing an article on this subject of synchronicity. And I had broken it off in order to go out for a walk with my dog. And I'd tossed a book which was lying around onto my armchair to have a look at it when I got back. Mm. This book was called, it had an odd title, You Are Sentenced to Life, by a doctor, I think, called Cheslov. But anyway, I got back from my walk, opened the book casually, and the first thing I see is Melchizedek.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, now there really is a preposterous coincidence. I just finished talking about the most absurd synchronicity I know about Melchizedek. I tossed this book onto my chair casually, which I haven't looked at in years and years. Mm. In fact, to be honest, I'd never looked inside it before, simply because I recognized this as a book that I'd bought in Los Angeles and hadn't so far bothered to read. Mm. So, when I thought, my God, this is really coincidence, this is really true synchronicity. Mm. And ever since then, I've had a feeling that synchronicity plays an enormously important part in our lives and destinies.
Yes, yes.
And that when you begin to get these synchronicities, then you realize that you're going in the right direction. Keep going.
Do you think that they're more common? I've had this idea that synchronicity actually is happening around us all the time. It's just that we fail to recognize it because we don't remember, or we cannot connect the dots. Do you think that that's true, Colin?
Well, sometimes, yes. Sometimes you get all kinds of odd synchronicities. You must notice them, as everyone does. You would look in the radio or on the television to find out what's on. And then, you'd discover these odd synchronicities. Somebody you realize is going to be on that you happened to be talking about last night.
Right.
And so on.
Yeah. It is prominent, and it is happening all the time, and some people have even argued that it's happening more and more, and as you said, Colin, I think that the people who are on their own path, the path of their life, so to speak, are probably more prone to discover these synchronicities as a kind of signposts, if you will, on the path that tells them where they're supposed to go. That's what I think.
And I think that one of these people who made this enormously important discovery is the man I mentioned earlier, who was saying to his friend how unhappy he was, when his friend said, "No, you're not unhappy, Sid. You just think you are." And this hit him as a revelation. Mm. Now, that guy was called Sid Banks, and he's become actually a quite well-known teacher in California since then. Mm-hmm. Not in any way an intellectual, a person, without any real background or education, almost an ordinary working man. But the point was, when his friend said, "No, you're not unhappy, Sid, you just think you are," this revelation was enough to alter his whole life. So it's not difficult.
Yeah, that's right. It's all about the approach to life and how we think about life. Colin, I'd like to fire off a question here from one of our listeners that came in through our submission form here, and basically it's the question goes like this: You've written extensively on schizophrenia, and at least a bit on on Freemasonry, and the person who's writing is asking if you have any thoughts on the Freemasons' inordinate interest in schizophrenia, and he brings